So those are some quotations or quotes from tributes which poured in for the late former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan. He was laid to rest at the military cemetery in Burma Camp here in Accra a few hours ago. It's been 3 days of state mourning. Kofi Annan was given a state burial, state funeral as well, which was attended by some of the world's leaders, past and present, traditional authorities, among others. The funeral service held at the Accra International Conference Center attracted people from all walks of life. We'll take you inside to listen to some of the glowing tributes paid to Ghana's illustrious son, Kofi Annan. But first, here is Maxwell Agbagba. He has details of the dignitaries in attendance.
We are currently at the Accra International Conference Center where the burial and funeral service for the late Secretary General is happening. Well, inside the auditorium itself, we have Liberia's President George Weah in there. We also have Kenya's opposition leader Raila Odinga also in there. Of course, in 2007, Kofi Annan was in Kenya when that election disagreement was at its peak. It was Kofi Annan who was able to resolve that disagreement between Raila Odinga and then Mwai Kibaki at the time in 2007 when other high-profile politicians or dignitaries were unable to resolve it. Kofi Annan made sure he brought peace to Kenya. Today, Raila Odinga is in here to also pay his last respect. Inside the Accra International Conference Center, also we have the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in there. We also have Ghana's President Akufo-Addo in there together with his Vice President Mambudu Bawumia. All of Ghana's former presidents are also in there, and they've had an opportunity to file past the body and also pay their last respect. On the precincts of the Accra International Conference Center, all the flags here, I'm talking about the Ghana flags and then the United Nations flags, are flying at half-mast. There is tight security here as some major roads have also been blocked to ensure that there is order. In some minutes, though, the remains of Mr. Kofi Annan will be conveyed through the principal streets of Accra to the Burma Camp Military Cemetery, where it will be finally interred. The Burma Camp Military Cemetery is a new cemetery already. We had the former Vice President of Ghana, Mr. Atta, buried there. We also had Ghana's former senior minister also buried there. He's going to be the third, high-profile person to be buried at the new Burma Camp Military Cemetery.
Maxwell Agbagba earlier today. Let's take a look at some of the tributes read in honor of Mr. Kofi Annan, starting from his widow, Nan Maria Annan, who has been thanking Ghana for giving her an extraordinary man.
I always believed that his inner strength and sense of whole came from his deep roots here, and I want to thank Ghana for giving us such an extraordinary human being. As a student leader, he attended a conference in Freetown in Sierra Leone. A Ford Foundation scout spotted him as having the potential of a future leader. How right he was. And that was why he got the scholarship to McAllister. The rest is history, but is it not amazing that he already at that young age would have his irresistible aura of radiant warmth and determination? We who met him later in life could all feel it, this aura and his joy of life. Would not his joy of life be the very foundation, the very reason for him to work for a better and fairer world for all? Add to this his determination to find solutions to challenges, his compassion. We have seen the tributes of leaders from around the world, recognizing his deep humanity and achievements on the world stage. But equally important are the words of those whose names you may not know, but whose lives he touched. This is especially true of the young, in whom he believed so fervently. He would often address them directly. Were they drawn in because they found a kindred soul who spoke to them from his heart?
Nan Maria Annan there. We can now listen to tributes by the children read by his daughter, Amma.
My father will always be someone special in my life. When I was young, he knew everything. He could fix everything and told amazing stories. As I became an adult, I truly learned to appreciate my father for exactly what he is, a man with a generosity of spirit who gave himself to others, put himself at their disposal, and was one of the most loving people I know. My father always made you feel welcome and listened attentively to everything you had to say. He may not have been the coolest father, but in my eyes, Daddy always walked on water. One afternoon, a few years ago, he invited me to accompany him to a friend's concert. Later that evening, I got ready to go in a pair of trousers and white top. In contrast to my surprise, Daddy was in a suit. "Why are you wearing a suit to a concert?" I asked. "You're meant to be casually dressed." "I am casual," he replied. "See, no tie." He moved effortlessly from shanty to palace, from impoverished streets to government enclaves, from a morning greeting with a member of the household or a moment shared with a loved one to negotiating for international peace. He understood only too well that, like hamsters on a wheel, most of us spend our lives running around in circles, locked in our little bubbles, trying our utmost to insulate ourselves from violence, poverty, crime, or pollution. Each, if not all of these conditions, is a reality for the people that were always in the forefront of his mind.
Kofi Annan was the United Nations, and the United Nations was Kofi Annan. Those were the words of the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, who described the death of Mr. Annan as a personal loss to him.
Kofi Annan was both one of a kind and one of us. He was an exceptional global leader, and he was also someone virtually anyone in the world could see themselves in. Those on the far reaches of poverty, conflict and despair, who always found in him an ally. The junior UN staffer following in his footsteps. The young person to whom he said until his dying breath, and I quote, "Always remember, you are never too young to lead, and we are never too old to learn." But his words were tough and wise, and sometimes the graver a situation, the lower that voice would get. We would lean in to listen, and the world would lean in, and we were rewarded by his wisdom. Kofi Annan was courageous, speaking truth to power, while subjecting himself to intense self-scrutiny. And like his predecessor, Dag Hammarskjöld, he had an almost mystical sense of the rule of the United Nations as a force for good in a world of ills.
Let's now hear from President Akufo-Addo, who said Kofi Annan was an ardent believer in the capacity of the Ghanaian and African to chart his or her own course onto the path of progress and prosperity.
Charming, cosmopolitan, consensus builder, elegant, eloquent, gentle-mannered, modest, polyglot, proud African, peacemaker, quintessential diplomat. These words are still inadequate to capture the fullness of the personality of Kofi Annan, one of the truly iconic figures of modern times. Even though he was my senior, we were good friends for most of my adult life. His father, H.R. Annan, was one of the stalwarts of the Dankwa Domo Buzia political tradition, serving as the Ashanti Regional Minister under Prime Minister Dr. Kofi Annan Buzia's Progress Party government of the Second Republic. Although he never openly acknowledged in my presence his attachment to the tradition, His advocacy of human rights, respect for the rule of law, and the principle of democratic accountability was the very essence of that tradition. Highly admired Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan was the first from sub-Saharan Africa to occupy this exalted office, which made him the world's top diplomat. He brought considerable renown to our country by this position and by his conduct and comportment in the global arena. Indeed, the outpouring of tributes from the world over is an accurate measure of the man, a man who gave his life to making peace where there was conflict, to defending the voiceless who were powerless, to promoting virtue where there was evil. Despite the unjustified attacks on him, trying to fix him with responsibility for the genocides in Rwanda and Srebrenica when he was head of UN peace operations, he never lost his moral compass, as he showed when he stood up to the might of the United States of America when she was embarking on her ill-fated intervention in Iraq. Kofi Annan's epic but unavailing effort to establish the supremacy of international law over the actions of even the world's greatest power won him the admiration of all right-thinking persons. He has been vindicated by history.
Vindicated by history, President Akufo-Addo there, Masol Agbagba, has also been speaking with some dignitaries, including former President John Mahama.
All of Ghana's former presidents were present at the Accra International Conference Center for the funeral service. We've been speaking to former President Mahama, who has described Kofi Annan as a man of peace. He's urging all Ghanaians to emulate the life that he lived.
Well, we all pass. We all bask in his glory. He rose to the top of an international organization, the United Nations, and all of us in Ghana and Africa are proud of him.
What lessons can we draw from his life here on earth?
His humility, his modesty, his respect, and his work for world peace.
I've also been speaking to the son of Kofi Annan. He says the world knew his father as a UN Secretary General, but he was a father to him, first of all, before that position of Secretary General. He says the family is going to miss him.
He was the man that you knew him as, kind, compassionate, caring, and all he cared about was other people, people's welfare, the welfare of the people that had the least. He cared most about, and about equality, humanity, justice, and decency.
What do you miss about him?
It's a loss that can't be ever replaced. The father to a son, it's an unconditional love that can never be replaced.
Communications officer at the Kofi Annan Foundation says they are going to continue with the good works of the former UN Secretary General.
I always, having worked with the man for 5 years, I always say that he was the same man in private as he was on screen or as he was on public. There were no two Kofi Annan.
Kofi Annan has been laid to rest, but what lessons can be drawn from his life? Here are some Ghanaians sharing their thoughts.
To be very honest with you, is somebody that I really admire. To me personally, he is an inspiration to me. Ever since I got to know about him from childhood, I've always desired to be at where he has been. And watching him go into the bosom of our fathers today has been something I've been thinking about. And to be very honest with you, it is something I am saying that all the other people that are watching should also take something out of the life of this man. He is a man of peace, as a matter of fact. And peace, we all know, is something that we cannot live without. And so if we can live a very successful life, a life that is worthy of emulation, then we can copy something from this man. Oh, okay. Honestly, I once listened to one of his speech in...
And everyone's wishes that he finds peace in the bosom of the Lord.